Hi guys. So today I wanted to speak about my journey with alopecia. Now, I want to answer the questions that people who know someone with alopecia would ask, or maybe they would be a little too afraid to ask. So I have, alopecia universalis. Now, that is the most extensive form of alopecia. There's like three levels. There's alopecia areata, then there's alopecia totalis, and then alopecia universalis. So regular alopecia, usually people will get a couple of bald spots here and there, and most times they go away, and it's not too bad. It's something they suffer with, but it's not. It's sometimes it doesn't last forever. Now, with alopecia totalis, usually the person will lose all the hair on their head, but just the head. It wouldn't translate to the rest of the body. And alopecia universalis, now that's the most extensive form, and that means that you lose all the hair in your body. Now, with alopecia, the immune system, it mistakenly attacks your hair follicles like if it was a foreign object. Like if you had a disease in your body, your immune system is there to fight off diseases or sicknesses. Well, with alopecia, your body is like sending the wrong signal and it attacks your hair follicles. Now, sometimes the hair follicles will stay alive and your hair can grow back, but there's no guarantee it would stay. Now, it usually affects universalis. There it is. It will affect your scalp, your eyebrows, eyelashes, facial hair, arm hair, leg hair, just all around, all the hair in your body. It is not contagious and it is not caused by like poor hygiene or anything of that nature. They honestly don't know the actual cause. It's not genetic. Like they really don't have any answers to why we suffer through alopecia. Now, my story in 2013, I was combing my hair one day. I had really long curly hair, and I was combing my hair one day, and I felt like a smoothness on my scalp, and I freaked out, and I ran, and I told my grandmother. I asked my grandmother to come and check to see, what was going on with my head, and she she definitely freaked out when she saw the bald spot. It was a bald spot about the size of a quarter, and she said she saw another one a little smaller, about the size of a nickel. Now, I went to the dermatologist and I made an appointment, and I didn't know how long I had it, or I really didn't know what it was. I thought maybe I was stressed out. I had just started college, so I really didn't know why was it causing it. So I went to the dermatologist, and they started me on some treatments, and they informed me that I had alopecia. At first they said I had alopecia areata, and I didn't, I just kind of went with the treatment, and they were giving me injections on every pore in those three bald spots. By the time I got my appointment, I had three, and they were giving me injections in each pore, and it wasn't really too painful, but I was really, really sick afterwards. But they told me that was the treatment they would do, and it would grow back. So I did it, and I did it every 3 weeks for about 7 months. Now, around that time, I weighed about 113 pounds. And, like when I was younger, I had, baby fat. But then, as I got into my late teens and early adulthood, I was slim. And then as the weeks were going by and every appointment, I was just gaining weight and gaining weight and gaining weight. I didn't know why. And I felt extremely sick like the whole time. So I would only start to feel better maybe 2 or 3 days right before my appointment. And I would go to my appointment and I was just sick. And it was just like that cycle of being sick all the time and then being stressed out because I wasn't fitting into my clothes. I was losing my hair. And I just, I was going through so much at that time. And by this point, I had the big one back here, and then I had about three, and then throughout the treatment, they started to merge into one. So, like, it was getting worse. Like the treatment wasn't working. I especially not as fast as I wanted it to, but the doctor just explained, that I had to keep keep with it and, hope for the best kind of thing. So I did that. And in, going through all that, like it was very emotional for me. Like my confidence level was down, my anxiety was super high, my self-esteem was so low because not only was I losing my hair, but I was gaining so much weight. I was gaining like 10 pounds every time I went to an appointment. So in the span of the 7 months, I gained about like 150 pounds, I would say. I gained a lot of weight. And I was just feeling sick. So I was feeling sick on top of all of that. So one day on my 7 month appointment, I decided to ask the doctor, like, why was I gaining the weight and why was it getting so big? I was just so frustrated. And she kind of told me, she had me on the injections. She had me on some drops. It looked like eye drops or nose drops. And the drops were like water drops I was putting on every night. And then she had me on a cream for my eczema and another cream for to put on after the drops. So I was doing all of that. And in the 7 month appointment, I just couldn't take it anymore. I went from being like 115 pounds to being almost 200 pounds. And and eventually I ended up gaining even more weight after that. But it wasn't about the gaining of the weight, it was how I was feeling. I was just so sick. And she explained to me that she said, well, you've been on steroids. And I'm like, what do you mean I've been on steroids? And turns out that the injections were steroids. The cream for my eczema that she had me putting all over my body was steroids. The drops were steroids. Everything was steroids, and I had no idea. I didn't. It didn't even occur to me to ask her, if it was steroids or not. I had never been on steroids. It was just something I knew about from like if my friend had asthma, I knew she would take like a steroid, but I really didn't know about steroids and the effects of steroids. And so after about the 7 months, by the time the 7 months was up, that I was like kind of fed up, I had lost like all of this amount of hair. So the injections to me, in my opinion, uh, the injections to me, it sped up the process instead of slowing it down in my case, because with alopecia every single case is different. So what will work for me would maybe not work for you, or it maybe will work for you. So maybe many people have done the injections and they did, it did work. But at that point, because alopecia is something that they don't really understand, they didn't understand that I didn't have normal alopecia. I had the progressive alopecia. I had the worst kind. So we didn't know yet that it was going to travel so far. And then I stopped the treatment by that time, and I just kind of dealt with it. And at that time I was in college, and it was affecting me a lot, but I just kind of had to deal with it in my mind. And then it just kept falling. It kept falling, and it took about, I would say, it took about a year and a half, almost two, for me to fully lose it all. But by the time I decided to just kind of get rid of it, it was December. It was a few days before Christmas in 2015, and I had like I would say like a ring. I like to explain it as a ring around my head, and I would try, I would put on like a hat and then like let the little strands like fall down so people wouldn't notice that I didn't have any hair, but the strands were so little. Like I had like maybe four strands, of small thickness of hair. And I remember it being a couple days before Christmas, and I kind of went into the bathroom and I got a razor and I just kind of shaved it off. And um I didn't still know at this point, I still didn't know I had universalis. So slowly after that, I started to accept the fact that, okay, my hair is not there, so I would just always wear a hat. And then um a couple weeks later, I started to notice that my eyebrows were thinning. Like they were thinning, but still I wasn't making the connection. Uh, so I'm thinking I was just gonna lose my hair. And my eyebrows were thinning, and then I noticed that in my eyelashes, I had like patches of like hair missing, like mini little bald spots. So I did my research about, alopecia and the different kinds, and I realized that, okay, maybe, maybe it's a little more aggressive than I thought it was. So it took about another 6 months to a year. Once it started falling, once my eyebrows and my eyelashes started falling, I then realized that I didn't have any nose hair anymore. I used to have like peach fuzz on my arms, and that kind of disappeared. The hairs in my legs were patchy. Once I started to know what to look for, I realized that I wasn't shaving as often, like my legs, and so I realized that okay, it was just all over my body. And it took a lot of acceptance. It took a lot of time to um, accept the fact that I was a woman without no hair. And it was hard. It was really hard. Um, my family was really supportive through it all. Even when I would tell them, um, I think it wasn't the lack of support. I think it was the onset of emotion. So like when I, when they one thing was telling them and another thing was them seeing it. And when they see it, the emotion it brought out in them, it affected me so much because I just felt like I was hurting them. I really didn't, I really didn't want that. Of course not. I didn't want to lose my hair, and neither did they. So I'll never forget telling like my mom and my dad. Like those two were the most impactful for me. And and I just kind of had to get through it. And sometimes, sometimes we go through things, but we forget to realize that sometimes it could be worse. It could be so much worse. I could, there could be a million other things I could be going through. And right now, I'm at peace with it right now. There is treatments out there. There's newer treatments. I got really afraid because throughout, doing the steroid treatment, it messed up my metabolism, and I have like steroid damage, and it was really hard to even try to begin to lose the weight. Or no matter how many times I go to the gym or exercise, nothing would help. It didn't matter how I ate. I was a vegan for like 15 months, and nothing helped. Like nothing helped. So I just kind of had to get to a place where I was just accepting of myself. And that was really hard. And to this day, I struggle. Um, but after about 2 years, I would say, when, kind of my hair was just there was just nothing left. And I would just like, I would have a little bit of eyebrow hair, like almost like peach fuzz. I would kind of like shave it with my head. I didn't mind shaving it. Um, I let it, I usually save it, but I didn't now for the video, so you guys can see pretty much like what does grow, because it does grow, but it's very little. It grows very short, and if I pull on it, it'll come out. So I'm not sure if you guys can tell, but I have a little bit. It feels just like a little furry, and it's not in all spots. Like some spots are just completely smooth. But there is little places, so I normally would shave it. Um, because it's just uncomfortable. It feels weird. The sensations in your head change. It doesn't feel the same when somebody touches me, or when you have hair and you kind of like, you kind of scratch your head and you feel that kind of relief. I don't feel that. There's certain things that I also would never stop doing. So like I get out the shower and I will always like use the towel and still kind of like, do those muscle memory motions. But I had to get to a place where I accepted it, and there's a lot of questions I get all the time. Like if I have cancer, or do I shave, or can it grow back? Does it hurt, or do I wear wigs? Now, it doesn't hurt. It's irritating, yes, because I have different sensations. Like it feels very different. Um, it can grow back, but it can also fall out again. So how the doctor explained it to me is usually alopecia is misdiagnosed when you're younger. And for people in my case that have it, the highest stage, which is universalis, we often get misdiagnosed when we're younger. And I remember when I was about 12 years old, I went camping and I got sick. eating grill food. So I'm like allergic to charcoal or lighter fluid. Like I can't eat those kind of foods. And when we went camping we went to the Poconos in Pennsylvania. The night before we came home, I ate some grill food and I was extremely sick within like an hour of eating. I was so sick, and by the time they brought me home, I had to go to the hospital. And then I was severely dehydrated from all the vomiting, and I was in the hospital for about 6 or 7 days. And by the time they went to release me, I had a bald spot back here about this big, and my grandmother noticed it when they were releasing me. We were combing my hair, and she realized it. And when she realized it, she called the doctor. She was freaking out, and they kind of told her it was malnutrition, and it was just because I was in the hospital for that long, and maybe it was just the fact that I was getting IVs, I wasn't eating. So they misdiagnosed me then because they didn't know, they didn't know what was the cause. There's really no test for you to make, that the doctors can make to find out if you have alopecia or not. So they misdiagnosed me then, and usually, when it happens when you're younger, it comes back when you're older, like full force, like with a vengeance. So it comes back and it goes much faster for some people because, like I said, every case is different. Some people could just have a couple bald spots and that bald spot will just stay there. And it'll just be the one bald spot and it'll never grow. You just really never know. So then, with the questions, I was wearing wigs for a long time, especially like with my hat. I felt more comfortable that way. I wasn't necessarily like, you know, I wouldn't like glue it down and cut it and, do all that stuff. I would just like put the wig on and then put my hat on and then just kind of call it a day. And uh, the problem with that is that I come to the conclusion that wigs are not necessarily made for people with no hair. And I say that because they're really, really uncomfortable when you have a bald scalp. The cap is uncomfortable. The inside is super itchy. Like you get sweaty. Like you do not feel like you have your own hair in any kind of way. And the ones that are made with like silk, I understand that there's plenty of them that are made with like silk and customized human hair. There's so many different kinds, but those kinds are really, really expensive. And I just honestly I couldn't afford that, so I would just get, the best wigs I could, and no matter which ones I tried, I would try wetting it. I would try putting caps underneath, and then I suffer from migraines, so if I would put the cap underneath, it would really hurt my head, and it just becomes so sensitive. I couldn't really understand how when I had hair, I was never tender-headed, but as soon as I didn't have any more hair, my scalp is just super sensitive. Even when I touch it, it's like I feel the sensation. So, it's just not something that's so comfortable for me. It's been hard when I think about things like work and school, because it's not that I really mind people staring, is that sometimes when people see me, they get like so sad. They get so sad, and they either, a lot of people suffer from cancer losses, so especially when I was working, especially at the bank, I was sitting with people and dealing with people all day. And, some of them were elderly and some of them lost their husbands, or just battled cancer themselves. And, they would just automatically assume that, I'm suffering some kind of cancer. And I would feel so bad because I would feel like my thing is not as bad as your thing. And, I would just feel bad. It would create like a lot of emotions in me when they would just assume that I had cancer. And they were just like, oh, they just want to pray for me, or they want me to tell them how my treatment is going. And, I would just feel so bad because not only would I be forced to talk about something that's hard for me, but, I would have to like tell them, oh, okay, mine's is not as bad as yours. And then I just kind of like, I would just like, as a defense mechanism, I would just like, oh, no, 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 I'm not, my thing is not important. Like your cancer was so important, like please don't compare me to that. So I didn't know what to say. It didn't matter how many times I went through it a day, I didn't know what to say. And it was difficult, and it is still difficult. because I have a 4-year-old son, and I think about, when he goes to school and, I go pick him up, like, I talk to my husband and I'm like, maybe I should buy some wigs because, I don't want them to make fun of him in school. Like, so there's just so many things that go through your mind. Going to interviews and making sure that, the wig looks, you know, like it's mine because I don't want them to think I'm sick. And there's just so many things that you have to think about and and kind of go through, but then you realize that at the end of the day, I'm just me, and I can only do what I can do. Now, the hardest thing in the beginning was losing my hair, of course, right? Seeing myself in the mirror, realizing, and as a woman, especially with, my hair was really long. My hair was all the way down to the edges of my waist, and it was always curly, it was always long. I loved my hair. It was a complete part of my identity. And uh losing it, you know, it was really tough, but then I realized that there was other things later on, right? I realized how other things were affecting me so much more than just me losing my hair, right? Losing my hair affected me visually for the most part, right? Emotionally. But then I realized after I kind of got to a place of acceptance, I realized that what I was suffering most from was my filters, right? And your filters are your eyelashes, your eyebrows, your nose hair, especially. So my eyes are constantly irritated. I have to take drops. I have to put drops in, sorry, because your eyelashes filter out dust throughout the day. So, my eyes are always constantly irritated, or I started suffering allergies that I never had because, your nose hairs are filters too. So they filter out the dust, they filter out allergens. Uh, so were, those two things were so much harder to deal with than me actually having lost my hair, right? Because I was dealing with those things physically. Now I was sick with allergies, and, my eyes were always irritated or always watery. And now I have like a severe dry eye condition. So like those things affected me more after, getting over the fact that, okay, visually I lost my hair. Um, Now, treatments, like I told you, it was steroids. There is immunotherapy. There's topical medications. I recently went to the doctor and they're trying to put me on a medication. But that medication, it just so happens that it makes you prone to infection. And, alopecia is an autoimmune disease, which already makes you prone to, getting sick faster and stuff like that. So it's something I do have to think about, but I don't know if like the like the risk is worth the reward kind of thing. And of course, I would love to have my hair back. Like, and like of anyone with alopecia would want their hair back, but I also don't want to lose it again. So if it's something I feel like, if it's something where I'm gonna do some kind of treatment and get my hair back and then lose it again, I'd rather just never have it again, if that makes sense. I don't want to go through losing it again. So I just, if you're going through alopecia, if you just found out you have alopecia, just, you know, give yourself the time to grieve. Give yourself grace. Um, you know, don't compare your journey to everyone else's because everyone is different. Just because that's my experience doesn't mean it could happen even to anyone else in the same way. Like everyone's experience is different. And, it's okay to have hard days and it's okay to grieve the loss of your hair. It will, it will ease as time passes by, and, no matter what anybody thinks or no matter what anybody says, like you do what's comfortable for you. For me, the sensations on my head, I don't like the way things feel on even sometimes the wind on my head, I don't like the way it feels. It's just too sensitive for me. So most times I go out and I'm wearing my hat. Uh, this is my favorite little hat. I have a bunch of them. Um, they're not super thin, but they're not super thick either. And they go on, and I put it on, and that's usually how I pass my day. That's usually how I pass my day. I wear my hat because of how it feels. So this is like, to me, is like a little protection against everything else. I try like the bandanas, I try like the silk scarves. Like nothing to me seems comfortable. But this does. For me at least it works. When I do have like the hair, I do shave it. But then I go through like a day or two where it feels like uncomfortable. It'll take a really long time. Even this growth right here, I'm not sure if you can tell. I hope you can tell. Even the little fuzzies that grow, like this growth right here, it's been over a month and it's just, it's very little bit, it's very light. Um, so just, if you do know someone that has alopecia, thank you for like being there for them and, understanding. It's okay to ask questions. Granted, you have to, consider what they're going through and kind of follow their lead. But it's good to know that, people just accept you just for you, not based on how many eyelashes you have. I love to do my makeup. That was another big thing for me. I love to do my makeup, but I even tried putting like the fake eyelashes, even the magnetic ones. And for me, your eyelashes are a guide for the false lashes. So when you don't have the false lashes, when you don't have your eyelashes, the false lashes, almost like you kind of got to position them in the right exact way, because if not, they irritate your eyes. They're not positioned in the right way. And I've tried doing like like the stamping and, drawing on each eyelash, and, it's just a lot. It's just a lot. And, I just kind of decided to just accept myself the way that I am. And, thankfully, I have a good support system. And, my family is very accepting. And I love them all dearly for it. My son doesn't like when I wear wigs. I have tried. So for him, he, even since he was baby, like he was one, even at a couple of months old, I would try to put it on even for pictures or like even holidays. Like that would affect me when we had like family photos and stuff like that. And I would try to put on the wig, and my son would not have it. He would just cry until I took it off. So right now it's been, um, I think it's been over a year and a half, and I haven't worn a wig. And, honestly, I'm okay with that. It's me. So, if you're living with someone or you're supporting someone who has alopecia, I hope this video helped you at least understand a little bit more. And if you have alopecia, I'm hoping you understand. I'm hoping you feel a little less alone. And everyone experience is unique, and just don't compare yourself to anyone else. And I just hope that, no one has to go through it alone. And if you have any questions, feel free to write in the comments, and I'll definitely answer. If you're going through it and you need some support or you just need someone to talk to, I'm here. So definitely comment down below if you have any questions, and goodbye for now. Thank you for hearing my story.